Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Joining me today is Andre Brice, North American Regional Manager for Arlo, a company revolutionizing how training programs operate with automation and efficiency. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Andre's fascinating journey spans marketing, disaster management, and search and rescue. In this episode, we explore the essential communication skills that connect these worlds, from building authentic relationships to adapting under pressure. If you've ever wondered how to communicate more effectively, whether it's leading a team, connecting with clients, or navigating high-stakes situations, you won't want to miss this conversation. Let's dive in. Andre, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's great to be here.
Absolutely, my pleasure to have you. Before we kick things off, why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about you, your background, and the exciting work that you're doing today?
Yeah, definitely. So currently I serve as the North American Regional Manager for Arlo. And what we are is we make software that helps automate all that kind of manual work that goes into running a training program, whether that's in-house for your own team or if you're an organization that actually sells courses or learning externally. But my background, it really comes in two flavors. It comes in marketing and then also disaster management and search and rescue. So two very different flavors. On the marketing side, I kind of got started in that world by founding a marketing agency a number of years ago. But I've also worked in the marketing team here at Arlo. And then on the disaster management, search and rescue side of things, as my accent probably gave it away, I'm not from here. I'm originally from New Zealand. And in New Zealand, we get earthquakes, we get floods and storms like many other parts of the world. And we're a small island country, so we're surrounded by water. And therefore, tsunamis and the likes are also a risk. So I was in a team that was there to respond if or when disasters happened and really try and help and save as many people as possible. And so two very different worlds, marketing, disaster management, but a common thread that did kind of go through those two worlds was communication, right? Both of them, it's a crucial piece. It's such a huge component. And so I've had, the privilege of working with some really awesome people, some really great communicators over the years, and that's really helped, myself personally grow and learn.
Outstanding. No, what an interesting background to go from, with marketing, the disaster management, then also the work that you're doing now with Arlo. And shout out, big fan of Arlo. We use them here at Communispond. And you kind of took the words out of my mouth as I think about the connecting thread really across all of those experiences. It is communication, whether you're working with training providers in that training space, definitely on the disaster management component, and really in marketing, communication plays such a big part of that, really to do it well and to do it effectively. So from your experience or your perspective, when you hear that somebody is a great communicator or that they have very strong communication skills, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think that if you really boil it down, to me, it comes down to being able to connect with people. And so, there's a few sides to that. There's obviously the side of being open to hearing other people's perspectives. There's a side of being able to translate something that's in your own mind in a way that others, well, not even just others, but the particular person or people you're talking with are going to be able to understand and it's going to have an impact on. And so, yeah, I think it really comes down to that ability to connect with people. And I think there's obviously technical communication skills. There's people who are, very technically good. They're able to use their body language and tonality, things that I can improve on definitely. But then there's also people who I've worked with who, on paper, technically maybe are not so great at communicating, but I still feel that they're so effective at communicating because they are so authentic, right? And sometimes almost the aspects of not being perfect, not following best practice, can kind of give them a unique angle on that authenticity. They use ums and ahs. They don't kind of use the correct grammar, but it gives them sort of a unique power there. So not to say that that stuff isn't important and we shouldn't focus on improving it, but it's yeah, I would say if you can connect with people, that's really the key aspect.
Yeah, so three big things that I heard there. As you mentioned, connecting with people, being able to translate what's in your mind and get that out into somebody else's mind, and that authenticity. And I think really the authenticity is going to be the driver that will help you to connect with people. And as you mentioned, sometimes maybe somebody, their writing skills aren't perfect, right? I'm not grasping for a word here, but their writing skills might not be top notch. They're not going to be an author. They're not going to be a journalist or have a book published. But when you put them in front of people, they are authentic. They can make those connections, and maybe they use stories or analogies really to help people understand what they're saying. And from that component, yeah, they are a great communicator. And so often, I think when people hear this idea of being a strong communicator, it's typically somebody that is comfortable on stage delivering a presentation. And there are just so many other things that go into being an effective, well rounded communicator. And especially this point of, as you mentioned, translating what's in your mind and getting it into someone else, whether it's an individual, small group, large group. And one of the prior guests mentioned it, and I absolutely loved it. They said 100% of what is said by the listener.
Mhm.
Meaning, it doesn't necessarily matter the words that come out of my mouth, it's how you interpret those words that's ultimately important, right? You're the receiver, you're the one processing it. So it's so important as a communicator to start to think about, how can I best get this message out there that's going to be understood in a way that I intended it? Because intention doesn't necessarily always line up with reality.
So true, Scott. And it's one of those things that, as you are developing that skill, you realize it sometimes the hard way, where you communicated something, you thought you were very clear, and then you find out that their interpretation of it was entirely different. They go out and are telling someone else, or that the action that kind of follows is almost opposite sometimes in kind of what you had expected or were trying to relay. I think one thing I would say though is it's sometimes sad when people have the perception that you're either kind of born a good communicator or born a bad communicator, and you kind of, that is how it is. And it's really just a skill, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
any skill, there'll be people who are naturally more that way inclined, but everyone can learn, everyone can improve. And I think that's would be a key thing I would say as well.
Spot on. Definitely learnable skills. And as you think about typically those people that you see, and especially if you think about maybe younger kids, right? Maybe it's an 8, 9, 10 year old, and like, oh, this person's going to be president. They're going to be a salesperson. They're going to be a leader because the kid is very comfortable talking with other people. No, not because they were born that way. It's likely because they were given countless opportunities to practice those skills from a very young age, right? Whether it was being in preschool and interacting with other kids, parents reading and talking to them, bringing them to the parks, bringing them to the playgrounds, giving them those reps and at bats. And for me, that's something that's huge with my kids. When we're at a restaurant, they're ordering. My daughter does not like to do that, but we try to push her out of the comfort zone that you're going to order when we go to a restaurant. When they're at the doctor, they're the ones talking to the doctor and just having these conversations, because it's a skill. You have to practice it. You have to flex those muscles in order to grow.
Exactly. And when you think about confidence, right? Well, confidence is so important, but I think underneath confidence, as you mentioned, there's competence, which is sort of the skill sets, the knowledge, the know-how, but then there's also the repetitions, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
having done it so many times that it becomes natural, it becomes an instinct. So yeah, those do definitely feed into confidence.
Absolutely. So, as I think about the work that you're doing, working for a software organization that
Hmm.
seems to be doing very well and is growing, there's probably lots of opportunities for communication, where communication can help things be very successful. Where if there's a communication breakdown, it could probably be disastrous. So, as you're thinking about whether it's the role that you're in or working in an organization like Arlo, what are some of the key communication skills that you are seeing as being mission critical to operate in that type of environment?
Yeah. And I would say that, if we're looking at, from the business or kind of marketing perspective, I'd say that right now, one of the key skills is being able to capture and hold someone's attention, right? The, nowadays attention is really that today's currency of the world. And as a business, you're competing for, if you're looking at your customers or your audience, you're competing for their attention with so many other things, including social media platforms that have kind of refined and honed their algorithms to hold people's attention. And so I think the skills that kind of go into that, I think a good starting point is an understanding of psychology and how the brain works. So that's really foundational. And there's lots of ways to learn about that. There's huge amounts of books and talks. I think that if I was to kind of give one example of a great book or a place to start, I would say that the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a really good kind of foundational book. So he's a psychologist, behavioral economics person who kind of actually won a Nobel Prize on his work and understanding how the brain works. And so reading that book not only gives you a good insight into how your own mind works, but also obviously how others as well around you. So I think that's a great place to start. But one other thing I'll add is that, if you're looking at it from that marketing perspective, what's really interesting is that marketing puts a bit more of a scientific lens on communication because you can have a hypothesis, you can make a change to how you're communicating, whether that's on the website, in a video, in an ad, and then measure the results. And you can then prove yourself right or wrong. And to constantly refine your understanding of what works, what's effective communication look like, or what's effective marketing look like. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of marketing. It's a really cool opportunity that if that's a space you're working in, that you get to do that. One thing I'll add on to that is you'll probably quickly realize that using emotion and storytelling is one of the key ways of conveying your message. And they've done studies on this. They've looked at kind of the impact of using emotion. And I think one I read recently was about they tried an ad that was purely emotional content versus an ad that was purely rational content. And the emotional one did about twice as good as the rational one. And it kind of comes back to that old saying, right? That we buy based on emotion and then we justify with logic. And I think at the end of the day, we're probably more or less rational than we'd like to admit we are.
I think that's a great perspective. Definitely less rational than we would like to admit. And yeah, from this marketing perspective, it's so fascinating as we think about, well, sometimes people maybe take marketing for granted, but how much all really goes into effective marketing. And I think it was yesterday afternoon, reading an article about Mr. Beast. He's like the biggest YouTuber, I believe, has hundreds of millions of followers. His videos, he puts a video out and it'll easily get 50 million views probably within the first day or weeks. And they're talking about how they are maniacal about measuring the data and testing things out, whether it is the thumbnail, whether it is the first 5 seconds that they're talking about in there, whether it's the copy that they use in the YouTube post. So when you think about that, and it's similar to things that we try to do at Communispond when we're promoting our training programs. What are the images that we're using? Does this image perform better than this image in maybe an ad or on a website? Does this copy work better to capture people's attention, to get them to inquire with us or to sign up to take a course? So it's great as you think about this idea of, one being somewhat scientific with it, where, measuring and evaluating and changes, but then at the same time, really using stories to make that emotional connection with people. And I know across the training industry, not only training people how to tell stories is something that's very much in demand, but just really using that as your organization to be able to tell the story of what you do and how you help people and how you help organizations.
100%. Storytelling is such a key skill and something you can, continually learn on. And there's so many ways you can take it. One tip I recently heard that I found very useful was this concept of, if you're writing a story to kind of put out the bullet points, the key kind of pieces of your story, and then think about which word kind of or words fit between those bullet points. And if you find that the words that fit between those bullet points is "and then," you've got a terrible story. You should start again. So if it's like, I had breakfast and then I went for a walk and then I did this and then I did that, very boring. It's not going to be a really impactful story. So you want to rewrite it in a way that the words between those bullet points are either but or therefore. And so that creates that tension, that release, that resolve. And so if you rethink about that story of, I'm eating breakfast, but something happens, and therefore something else. And so it's a very kind of simple little trick, but I think it kind of illustrates a bigger picture of how to write those kind of stories or turn your message into a story.
I think I saw either a video or an article. Was it? I think it may have been the guys from South Park, the creators of South Park, something
Oh wow.
very similar, talking about that's how they structure their shows and their episodes and create these stories as wacky and as crazy as they are. You could see how it applies from something like South Park all the way into a business setting when you're pitching an idea, perhaps to your board of directors. The way that you structure it and how it flows does make a big impact.
Yeah, very interesting.
Andre, as you think about your career, and we talked a little bit about kind of the interesting career path that you've taken, what's maybe the one key communication skill that you have really used, a lot and has really helped you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, I think that rather than a particular skill, I'd say that it's been the willingness to learn. Uh, there's so much information out there, whether it's books or videos or talks. Uh, I think I have a real passion for learning. I love learning and finding out new information, and so I think that would be a key factor. There's this saying that we used to have in the disaster response team that, when at the end of the day, when it comes to it, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. And, I think it's really relevant in the sense that your habits, your instincts are kind of built over time from training, from learning, from repetitions, and that is what is you're going to fall back on when you're in difficult situations, when you're under pressure. And so I think that's been a really helpful aspect of kind of my journey.
I love that. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. If I think about that, say, from if I have a big presentation coming up,
Mhm.
right, maybe a big client pitch, I'm not going to miraculously deliver a knockout presentation if I don't have those types of skills. I've never done these types of things before. So that's what it does. It kind of falls back to your level of training. Now, if you have practice, you have gone through training, you have learned those skills, you flex those muscles over time, then yes, the likelihood that you are going to nail that pitch a lot higher versus if I haven't delivered a presentation in 3 years, I've never done anything with it, never watched any videos, tutorials, worked with a coach. I'm just going to fall back to maybe a presentation skills that I learned in high school or something like that. Yeah, so I absolutely love that point. And when it comes to this concept of being a lifelong learner or really this willingness to learn, for me, that is a hallmark of a great communicator because great communicators know a lot about their audience. And because it will help you to tailor not only your content, but how you deliver it to each particular audience or create it in a way that it could appeal to multiple audiences. So, this idea of I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and learn a little bit more, whether it's about a particular skill or about a topic on which I will be communicating. So if I'm giving a presentation or I'm going into a client meeting, for me, that willingness to learn plays a big part on being able to really effectively deliver those communications that you're preparing for.
Yeah, and it's as you said, the ability to adapt how you communicate, not only just to the people that you're talking to with, but even the situation, right? So when we were, again, pulling back to that disaster management team, we would how we communicated with the team, and as leaders would be very different depending on if we're in a high pressure life or death situation versus when we're, things are more relaxed, we're potentially in a training session. And, for example, if we're in those kind of more high pressure situations, there's more on the line, we would be much more, I guess you could use the word controlling, much more restrictive, much more kind of direct in how we communicated. And in some situations, that would be a negative thing. But actually, in those situations, it actually gives the team confidence to be able to go out and do what they need to do because they know that it's black and white. There's no kind of gray area of should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? What do I do in this situation? It's this is what I need to do. I know how to do it, and I can go and do it. So that's very interesting. But then obviously, if you're in a different situation, you're in a more relaxed, you're more in a training session for For example, if you were that same way, then it becomes a problem. It becomes controlling. It doesn't give them opportunities to learn or push uh, their boundaries in terms of where they're comfortable. And so again, not just adapting to the people, but also adapting to the situation.
That adaptability is important, not only from just being in the situation, but I think also from adapting your mindset. And if I think back to several months ago, you and I did a presentation at a big conference. And I remember as I got to the first day, and I'm walking around, I'm seeing the environment that we were going to be presenting in, open a stage in an open environment in the middle of the trade show, lots of people in there, lots of people walking by, definitely lots of distractions. I just remember thinking, oh gosh, we're going to be in the middle of everything. If people start walking out of the presentation, it's just going to wreck me. I'm going to feel terrible. But then when I went and sat into the opening keynote, I believe it was Matthew McConaughey. And
Hmm.
he was great, very engaging speaker. But the whole time I noticed people kind of filing in and out, moving about. And that helped me just observing that little bit and paying attention. And as I walked around throughout the time leading up to ours, I saw the same thing happening. This was an environment where people were very much freely coming and going into these sessions. So it wasn't like 100 people go in, the doors close, nobody moves until it's over. Very much informal. So for me, that helped to kind of adjust my nerve levels, recalibrate my expectations, and in turn, just really helped my delivery style during that presentation. So, yeah, being aware, focusing on your environment, and all of those factors really go into how you will approach a particular situation.
Yeah, definitely.
Andre, as you think about your communication style, who has been someone from throughout your career that has had an influence on that? Maybe it was a particular skill you picked up from them, or it could have been just something that you learned about a particular author. But what's maybe something that you've taken from somebody else and really tweaked a little bit, made it your own?
Yeah, and it's such a difficult question because it's so hard to pinpoint to, a particular person or even a handful of people. It's been so many different people, both people I've met in real life, but also uh, books I've read, talks I've listened to. But I think, one example of someone who's had an impact would be one of the people I worked with in that disaster response team, and watching them communicate with people who are likely having the worst day of their life, right?
Mhm.
It almost seemed magic how quickly they could connect with them, how quickly they could build trust. And I would often walk away thinking, how did they do that? How did they build that connection so quickly in such a uncertain situation where people's emotions are high? Um, there's so much stress, right, in that situation. And what I ended up realizing was one of the key things that they were doing was everything about how they communicated was so congruent, right? How their tonality was, their body language, their voice, what they were actually saying. Uh, and the way that, part of the reason they could do that was because they actually meant it, right? They really cared about the person that they were talking to. They really wanted to help. And, we're social emotional beings and we pick up on that. We
Mhm.
notice that and we respond to it. So I'd say that that was one of the key things I noticed from them was just how all those different skills you talk about in terms of communication were also aligned. Because I think what happens is if you have misalignment, that's where it almost works negatively. You kind of break trust, you break that authenticity when your body language doesn't align with what you're saying or your tonality. And so, yeah, all of those coming together is an awesome thing to see.
Definitely needs to have that alignment between what you say, how you say it, and how you look when you say it. Because I could be saying the right things, and maybe my gestures are aligning with that. But if you just see on my face that I'm ready to have a nervous breakdown or I'm a wreck, it does. It creates that incongruency, and it helps or it hurts your authenticity and really can erode the trust. And I know a lot of us have probably met people before that have what I would call a manic type of energy, where every
Mm,
time you talk to them, regardless of what you're talking about, you kind of walk away feeling stressed out. So I'd imagine that type of person in a disaster management situation is not going to do well with helping people feel assured, even if they're saying the right things and maybe their body language is okay. But if they just have that kind of manic energy with the way that they talk, not going to work out well. Just like as you're working with leading your team, especially through challenging times or times of rapid growth or rapid change, you need to have that alignment between what you're saying, how you say it, how you look when you say it, and really can do that consistently time over time. And again, that's what will build trust with people and will ultimately have people really following along and buying into what you have to say.
Exactly. And just on that, Scott, that, the example there, obviously the examples I'd given were kind of the extreme situation of, disasters and whatnot. But as you mentioned, it's very relevant still to, a more corporate environment
Mm-hmm.
where you're dealing with people. And like you said, that congruency is key as well. Yeah.
Spot on. Andre, as we wrap up here, what piece of closing advice would you have to folks listening to this, really around the importance of the skills that we talked about today and the impact that they can have on their careers?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest pieces of advice would be to be curious. Uh, approach things with curiosity. And that's obviously very broad. It's a very high level piece of advice. So kind of bringing it, or making it real for a moment, I would say one thing that's really worked for myself is when you have, let's say you go into a conversation and you walk away from that conversation feeling really good, especially if that conversation, you were not looking forward to it, or you came out not with what you wanted, but you still felt good. Instead of just, brushing it off as saying, "Oh, that was a good conversation," taking that step back and thinking, why do I feel that way? Why was that good? Again, if you saw a website or you see an ad and you're like, "Oh, that makes me want to buy the product," or even, feel good about that brand. What about it made you feel that way? And, you can learn a lot from that, because if it worked on you, if it had that impact on you, the chances are that it probably does for others as well. And you can kind of then start to pick up uh, tips and tricks that you can kind of use in your own work. So I would say, yeah, being curious, being look into why does something work for myself, and how can I use that in my communication.
Yeah, it's great tangible advice around curiosity because, as you mentioned, saying be curious, that's very broad. And okay, well, how do I be more curious? And as you mentioned, really focus on that kind of that self-awareness around how things around you are making you feel. So you have a conversation with someone and you come away feeling good, you come away feeling bad. Why? Right? What was it maybe about them or maybe about me? You visit a website that just pulls you in, or you go down a social media rabbit hole on a particular company's page. Start to think, okay, what drew me in and what kept me there, right? Kind of how we kicked off. How do you get people's attention? How do you keep them engaged and kind of keep that attention? So as you start to go through those exercises, and whether it's taking mental notes or physically jotting things down, when you have some sort of an interaction, whether it's with a person or with a product, a service, a website, whatever it is, and as you start to think about that, you're going to pick up likely on patterns, and you're going to pick up on things that you can start incorporating, whether it is into your own tool belt of communication skills, or if you work at in a business and you're leading people, maybe how to interact with your team. If you work in marketing, how you can start to adapt some of those things for your social posts, for your website, to try and attract and engage with your customers. So I absolutely love that advice. Thank you, Andre.
Yeah, no problem. And it's, just to quickly add to that, it's the other side of it as well, is in terms of if someone thinks differently than you or acts differently than you, it's also about being curious about, why is that? Because it's easy to kind of naturally push back or put your guard up when someone has a different opinion or a different way of doing things. But again, having that curiosity to think about, well, let me try to understand,
Mm-hmm.
why do they have that perspective? Why are they doing it a particular way? So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because sometimes, like I said, just asking questions about somebody's perspective and trying to understand it doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means you want to learn more so you can just continue to grow as a human.
Hmm.
Andre, really appreciate you joining me today. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. If folks are looking to connect with you and to learn more about Arlo, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, best way is you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Welcome to flick me a message, and happy to help any way I can.
Outstanding. I'll be sure to put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Andre, thank you again. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Special thanks again to my guest, Andre Brice. I hope you found this discussion as insightful as I did. From mastering the art of storytelling to staying curious and authentic, Andre shared so many valuable takeaways that we can all apply to our personal and professional lives. If you want to connect with Andre or learn more about his work at Arlo, be sure to check out the links in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit from these insights. Thanks, and have a great day.